South Africa's former president, Thabo Mbeki, warns of countries facing the danger of protest similar to those that toppled governments in the Arab world a decade ago. Mbeki was called on the government to curb corruption and come up with a national plan to address challenges of poverty, unemployment, lawlessness and inequality. He warned that the state the country is in can trigger our very own version of anti-government protest similar to the Arab Spring if unemployment and corruption are not addressed. Dr. Azar Jammine, who's a Chief Economist, joins us now. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Azar. We do appreciate it. I think many were shocked, but it was expected when former President Thabo Mbeki stood up at the memorial of the late Jesse Duarte, indicating that government does not have a plan. He alluded to the fact that the president making promises of a social compact plan in the next 100 days. This was said at the SONA, but it just seems as though government doesn't have a clear plan, and at the end of the day, ordinary South Africans continue to suffer.
Ostensibly, government does have a plan, as announced in October 2020 by President Ramaphosa when he delivered the economic reconstruction and recovery plan. And basically it was based on the idea of massive infrastructural investment. He stated that he had reached agreement with private sector companies to embark upon 51 infrastructural investment projects worth 340 billion rand. In addition, the government was intent on deregulating the economy and embarking upon processes to try and improve state-owned enterprises through strategic equity partners. You know, he also suggested that government was going to embark upon a localization project to try and encourage people to buy local and to produce more things locally rather than to procure them from overseas. But, you know, we don't seem to have seen much progress in that regard, in regard to any of these notions and ideas. And instead, we've found ourselves being mired in further load shedding and intensification thereof. And we've seen our port and harbour facilities and railway networks leaving much to be desired, and ourselves being unable to exploit the full extent of the commodities price boom that we have been seeing. So it's been quite unfortunate from that point of view.
So, Dr. Azar, I'm hearing you say that there is a plan, but I think looking at the situation, it seems as though there might be a plan, but there's no execution of the plan. And it just seems as though unemployment is not really being dealt with. I would go as far as saying the plan that's currently on the table is not really addressing the main issues. For example, you had Labour Minister Thulaseng Moesi announcing a couple of days ago that by elections 2024, 2 million jobs would have been created. But how do you create jobs, so many jobs, in this current economic environment?
You're absolutely correct, Heidi. You know, it's pie in the sky to talk about creating 2 million jobs at present, especially when you look at some of the graphs that I see in my analysis that show that, if anything, the economy is becoming ever more capital intensive rather than labor intensive, because labor is proving to be too problematical for business to want to employ, either in terms of wage demands or just not being productive enough to and educated enough to actually meet the requirements of the economy. And you're absolutely correct. The real problem lies in the execution or implementation of these projects. There are some ideas on the line. We see the idea of embarking upon massive renewable energy projects to alleviate our electricity supply shortage, but nothing has happened in that regard, and that is what is so frustrating. So from that point of view, President Mbeki is correct.
I wanted to go a little bit more in depth with what the former president touched on, where he said we are going to continue seeing more unrest, and we are seeing this on a daily basis. I've covered numerous protests, and so have my colleagues, and referring it to what happened with the Arab Spring. Do you think that this could possibly happen here in South Africa as well? Things aren't getting better. Load shedding is exacerbating the situation. Interest rates were recently hiked. Everything is going up, and it just seems as though it's not getting better. I don't want to be that negative person, but how do you see the situation going?
There's no question that many of the factors that can contribute towards massive increases in social unrest are indeed in place. But fortunately, one realizes that this position has actually been in place for many years, other than the July unrest that we saw last year, which arguably was generated by political instigation rather than because of an uprising on the part of people around the country in protesting against their poverty. There is something in the country's structure that is fortunately seeming to be counteracting a complete explosion of unrest. And that gives me quite a lot of solace. South Africa doesn't seem to be all that amenable to populist ideas. And I think also on the other side, we do have something in place that many other countries don't have, and that is a valve mechanism, and that are our social grants, which are now being distributed to more than a third of the population. Nearly half of the population are getting social grants. Now, it's not a lot of money that is being dished out, but it is a valve mechanism that is enabling people to somehow, on the whole, survive with the minimal amount without having to be completely hungry and desperate. It's not a great solution from a longer term point of view, but in the short term, it is certainly helping to keep the unrest at bay.
Certainly. I'm glad you touched on social grants. Just very lastly, Dr. Azar, I wanted to quickly touch on interest rates. Many very shocked by this. However, the Reserve Bank didn't really have a choice but to increase interest rates. Many are saying that this is going to make things worse for their pockets and them basically needing to survive.
Undoubtedly, it will make things worse for their pockets, but it's precisely in order to try and fight off inflation, which in the longer term could be even worse for people's pockets than the rise in interest rates that we're currently seeing in the short term. If the Reserve Bank were not raising interest rates now and people were not feeling the pain, the risk would be that there would be a complete lawlessness in terms of demands for higher and higher wages. Businesses would start passing on price increases on products left, right, and center without the fear that they would lose business. Whereas now there is a real fear that if they do raise prices and if labor demands unduly higher wages, they will not be able to, business will not be able to survive, and workers will lose their jobs. And this is the manner in which higher interest rates are sending a lot of pain through to the individuals and to businesses, and to try and prevent them from passing on cost increases onto consumers, and in this way preventing a wage price spiral. And you've got to bear in mind that we are not as badly off right now in that particular regard as many overseas countries who are seeing higher inflation and that is running out of control, and may well see interest rates increasing in those countries by even more than they are increasing in South Africa right now.
Certainly. Great perspective there. Thank you so much for your insights. We do appreciate it. That was Dr. Azar Jammine, a chief economist, just speaking to us about the current economic environment and the remarks made by former President Thabo Mbeki about further unrest and anti-government protests. Hopefully it doesn't lead to that.